The thunder cracked overhead as June Vance collapsed to her knees in the mud beside the weathered barn, her black mourning dress soaking through as the relentless rain pelted down upon her shoulders. 18 months a widow, and still the grief had its way of bringing her to her knees when she least expected it. The rocking sea ranch had once been her husband's pride, but now it was slipping through her fingers like the rainwater streaming down her face. The bank would take everything by the months and her home, her land, all the memories she'd built since coming to Wyoming territory in 1873. "Madam, madam, are you all right?" A deep voice cut through the storm's roar. June looked up, rain and tears blurring her vision, to see a tall figure dismounting from a horse. He moved toward her with purposeful strides, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "I'm fine," she lied, attempting to stand, but her sodden skirts weighed her down. Without hesitation, strong arms lifted her from the mud. "You're not fine," the stranger said, his voice gruff but kind. "And no wife of mine is going to catch her death in this storm." June's breath caught in her throat. "I'm not your wife," she managed to say, too stunned by his words to struggle against his hold. The man's eyes, blue as summer sky, met hers. "You are now, as far as anyone who might be watching is concerned," he said quietly. "Name's Ross Carson. I've been hired to manage the Crawford place next door, and I just arrived to find outlaws watching your property. Calling you my wife seemed the safest explanation for helping you." June's confusion must have shown on her face because he added, "I'll explain everything once we get you dry." Ross carried her through the rain toward the main house, his boots squelching in the mud. June found herself staring at the strong line of his jaw, the way raindrops clung to his dark eyelashes. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. "I can walk," June protested weakly. "I'm sure you can, Mrs. Carson," he said, loud enough for anyone who might be listening, then dropped his voice to add, "But please let me help. Something's not right here." Once inside the small but tidy ranch house, Ross set her down gently near the hearth. He moved with unexpected efficiency, adding logs to the dying embers and coaxing them back to life. "You should change into something dry," he said, keeping his back turned to her as he worked. "I'll explain what I saw while you do." June hesitated, clutching her arms around herself. "How do I know I can trust you?" Ross turned, his expression somber. "You don't. But there are 3 men watching your property from the ridge to the north. They don't look like bankmen, and they're carrying more firepower than any honest folk need." He removed his dripping hat, revealing thick brown hair. "I've been riding for 2 days to reach the Crawford place. The owner, Samuel Crawford, hired me by letter to manage his ranch while he's back east handling family matters." June swallowed hard. "Sam Crawford is a good man. He was my husband's friend." "Then you know the land I'm talking about," Ross nodded. "When I arrived and saw those men watching your place, I decided to investigate. Then I saw you collapse by the barn." June moved to the small bedroom, leaving the door ajar so she could hear him speak while she changed behind a screen. "My husband, Thomas, died last winter. Influenza took him," she said, her voice steady despite the pain the words still brought. "I've been trying to keep the ranch going, but the bank is foreclosing at month's end." She emerged in a simple blue dress, her damp hair released from its pins to dry. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Carson, but I have nothing worth stealing, just memories and debts." Ross's eyes softened. "Mrs. Vance, June," she corrected him. "June," he repeated, and the sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Those men aren't looking for valuables. They're waiting for something or someone, and I'd bet my last dollar it has to do with your land." June sat heavily in the worn armchair by the fire. "What could they possibly want? This land barely sustains cattle anymore after the drought last year." Ross remained standing, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." He moved toward the window, peering out cautiously. "For now, it might be safer if we maintain this arrangement." If those men think you have a husband, they might be less likely to cause trouble. You want to pretend to be my husband? June asked incredulously. Ross turned to her, his expression grave. Just for appearances, I'll sleep in the barn, but something tells me you shouldn't be alone right now. June considered his words. She had no reason to trust this stranger, yet something in his steady gaze told her he was being truthful. And the thought of facing those watching men alone sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. Until we figure out what's happening, she agreed reluctantly. But I want the truth from you, Mr. Carson. Ross, he corrected with the ghost of a smile. If I'm to be your husband, even in name only, we should at least be on first-name terms. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the previous day's storm leaving everything washed clean. June rose early, as was her habit, to find Ross already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. "You're up early," she observed, tightening the shawl around her shoulders. Ross handed her a steaming cup. "Ranching hours," he explained. "Been up since first light, checked your stock. You've got a heifer that looks close to calving." June nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Daisy, I've been watching her." "You've done well, keeping this place running alone," Ross said, his eyes appraising her with newfound respect. "Not well enough to keep the bank away," June replied, the bitterness in her voice unmistakable. Ross took a seat at the small kitchen table. "About that. I rode the property line at dawn. Those men are still watching, but I also found something interesting near your North Creek." June sat across from him, her interest piqued. "What? Fresh diggings? Someone's been testing the soil, recently too. For what purpose?" Ross's eyes met hers. "If I had to guess, I'd say someone thinks there's something valuable on your land, something worth waiting for you to lose it to the bank so they can swoop in and claim it." June's mind raced. "But what? This land is good for cattle and not much else." "Thomas would have known if there was anything valuable here." "Would he have told you?" Ross asked quietly. The question stung, but June considered it honestly. "Yes, we had no secrets," Ross nodded, accepting her answer. "Then whatever it is, it's something new. Or something someone just discovered." He took a sip of his coffee. "How well do you know the banker handling your foreclosure, Herbert Wells?" "Well enough. He was always fair with Thomas." "And since Thomas died," June hesitated, "he's been impatient, less understanding." Ross's expression darkened. "I think we need to pay Mr. Wells a visit, together, as husband and wife." The ride into town was tense, with June acutely aware of Ross's solid presence beside her in the wagon. They had agreed on their story. Ross was a cousin of her late husband who had married her to help save the ranch. It was a common enough arrangement in these parts where survival often depended on such practical partnerships. Millstone Creek was a small but growing town, with a main street boasting a general store, saloon, church, and the territorial bank. June felt the curious stares as she walked beside Ross, his hand protectively at the small of her back. Herbert Wells was a thin man with spectacles that magnified his already bulbous eyes. He looked up from his ledger with surprise when June entered with Ross. "Mrs. Vance," he began, then glanced at Ross with suspicion. "It's Mrs. Carson now," Ross said smoothly, extending his hand. "Ross Carson, I've recently married June and come to help with the ranch." Wells's handshake was limp, his confusion evident. "I wasn't aware of any marriage." "It was a small ceremony," June explained, the lie feeling strange on her tongue. "Given my period of mourning only recently ended." "I see." Wells's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, congratulations. However, I'm afraid your marital status doesn't change the fact that the loan is significantly in arrears." Ross leaned forward, his manner businesslike. "I understand the situation, Mr. Wells. I'm hoping we might discuss an extension. I have some experience in cattle management and believe we can turn the ranch around with a bit more time." Wells shuffled papers nervously. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The bank has already made arrangements for the property." "Already made arrangements," June echoed. "But the foreclosure isn't final for another 3 weeks." Wells wouldn't meet her eyes. Yes, well, there's been significant interest in the land from investors. Ross's voice was dangerously calm. What investors would be interested in a struggling cattle ranch? I'm not at liberty to discuss bank business with you, Mr. Carson, Wells said stiffly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have appointments. Outside the bank, June's hands trembled with anger. He's never been like that before. So dismissive. Ross guided her toward the wagon, his eyes scanning the street. Because he's involved. Those men watching your ranch, Wells's eagerness to sell the land, it's all connected. But to what? June asked in frustration. Ross helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. I have an idea, but I need to confirm it. For now, let's stop at the general store. If we're playing the part of newlyweds, we should at least buy something to make it convincing. At the general store, Ross purchased supplies while June selected a few household necessities. The storekeeper's wife, Abigail Turner, couldn't contain her curiosity. June Vance. Or should I say June Carson now? The older woman's eyes twinkled with excitement. Town's absolutely buzzing about your new husband, and such a handsome one at that. June felt her cheeks warm. It happened rather suddenly. The best ones always do, Abigail said knowingly. After my Harold passed, I never thought I'd marry again. Then along came George, and within a month I was a Turner. She leaned closer. Is it true he's your late husband's cousin? Yes, June replied, sticking to their story. He came to offer condolences and, well, things progressed from there. How romantic, Abigail sighed. And just in time, too, with the ranch situation and all. June's interest sharpened. What do you mean? Abigail glanced around, then lowered her voice. Just that there's been talk, men coming through town asking about properties near the creek, especially yours, something about a survey they did last spring. What kind of survey? June asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Don't rightly know. But Herbert Wells has been meeting with fancy-dressed men from back east, in private. Abigail straightened as Ross approached. Your supplies are ready, Mr. Carson, and may I say, you found yourself a wonderful woman in June. Ross smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. I'm the fortunate one, Mrs. Turner. Outside, Ross loaded their purchases into the wagon. Learn anything interesting? He asked quietly. June relayed what Abigail had told her. Ross's expression grew thoughtful as they headed back to the ranch. A survey last spring, he mused. And now men digging at your creek. June, I think there might be something valuable under your land, something worth far more than cattle. June's grip tightened on the wagon seat. Like what? Could be several things. Gold's the obvious guess, but it could also be coal or copper. Ross's expression was grim. Whatever it is, Wells and his investors want it badly enough to try and cheat you out of your rightful claim. That evening, after a simple dinner, Ross spread a map of the property on the kitchen table. Show me exactly where your boundaries lie, he instructed. June traced the lines with her finger, pointing out the creek that ran through the northern section. Thomas always said this was the best part of our land. The water never ran dry, even in the worst drought. Ross's finger followed the creek's path. And it continues onto the Crawford property. Yes, though it's smaller there. Ross's eyes met hers, something like excitement kindling in their blue depths. June, I need to show you something tomorrow, something at the creek, but we'll need to be careful. Those men are still watching. June nodded, a strange mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through her. I trust you, she said, and realized with surprise that she meant it. That night, alone in her bed, June found her thoughts drifting to Ross. There was something about his quiet strength that reminded her of Thomas, yet he was entirely his own man. She wondered what it would be like to truly be his wife, not just in name, and the thought brought a warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer heat. In the barn, Ross lay awake, planning their next move. He hadn't told June everything, namely, that Samuel Crawford's letter had mentioned concerns about neighboring properties being targeted by mining interests. Crawford had hired Ross not just as a ranch manager, but to investigate these rumors. Finding June in distress had been unexpected. But now Ross was certain the Vance property was central to whatever was happening. And despite his professional interest, Ross couldn't deny that June herself had quickly become important to him. Her courage in the face of adversity, the quiet dignity with which she carried her grief, these qualities had impressed him more than he cared to admit. Dawn was breaking when a sound startled Ross from his light sleep. The crack of a rifle echoed across the property, followed by the frightened lowing of cattle. He grabbed his gun and ran toward the house, fear for June propelling him forward. She met him at the door, hair loose around her shoulders, clutching a shotgun. "Someone's shooting at the herd," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Stay inside," Ross ordered, but June was already pulling on boots. "It's my ranch," she said firmly. "My cattle." Ross recognized the determination in her expression and nodded curtly. "Stay behind me." They moved cautiously toward the pasture where the cattle were bunched nervously at one end. The morning mist hung low over the field, making it difficult to see. "There," June whispered, pointing to a figure on horseback at the far edge of the property. As they watched, the rider fired another shot into the air, sending the cattle into a panic. They began to run, breaking through the fence toward the road. "They're trying to stampede your herd," Ross growled. "Stay here." Before June could protest, he was running for the barn. Moments later, he emerged on horseback, racing toward the fleeing cattle. June watched in amazement as he expertly cut off the leaders, turning them back toward the ranch. His skill was evident in every movement, man and horse working as one. The mysterious rider, seeing Ross's intervention, spurred his horse away, disappearing into the tree line. By the time Ross had settled the cattle and repaired the broken fence, the sun was high in the sky. June met him with water and a cloth to wipe the dust from his face. "That was impressive," she said, handing him the water. Ross drank deeply before answering. 7 years working cattle drives between Texas and Kansas. You learn a thing or two." He examined the fence post. "This was deliberate. They're trying to run you off before we can figure out what's happening." June's expression hardened. "Then we'd better figure it out quickly." They set out for the creek on horseback, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen by the watchers. Ross led them through a dense copse of trees, emerging near the creek where it ran deep and clear. Dismounting, he knelt by the water's edge, examining the soil. "Look here," he said, pointing to an area where the bank had been disturbed. "Someone's been taking samples." June crouched beside him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "For what?" Ross scooped up a handful of the dark soil, letting it sift through his fingers. "Coal, most likely. See these black streaks? There's a seam running through your property. Probably continues onto Crawford's land, too." June stared at the innocent-looking soil. "Coal, but we've lived here for 5 years. Wouldn't Thomas have known? Not necessarily. It might be deep or only recently exposed by erosion." Ross stood, brushing his hands clean. "But if I'm right, this land is worth a fortune to the right buyers. The railroad's expanding west. They need coal for the engines." June's mind raced with the implications. "And Wells knows this. He's working with someone to get my land cheaply before I discover what it's worth." Ross nodded grimly. "We need proof, and we need to file a mineral claim before the foreclosure." "How?" "Wells will block any attempt I make. Not if we don't go through Wells." Ross's eyes held a determined gleam. "The territorial office is in Cheyenne. We could be there and back in 4 days if we push hard." June considered his words. "The men watching the ranch would follow us." "Probably," Ross agreed. "Which is why I'm going to create a distraction while you slip away." June shook her head. "No, we go together or not at all." She met his surprised gaze steadily. "This is my fight, Ross. I won't have you facing danger alone because of me." Something shifted in Ross's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Together, then," he agreed quietly. The plan they formulated was simple but risky. They would make a show of heading north, toward the neighboring town where the county courthouse stood. Once the watchers followed, they would double back and take the southern trail to Cheyenne. They spent the day preparing, gathering supplies and documents proving June's ownership of the land. As they worked, June found herself watching Ross, the capable way his hands moved, the thoughtful set of his features when he concentrated. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly as they packed saddlebags in the barn. "You barely know me." Ross paused, considering his answer. "At first, it was because Samuel Crawford asked me to investigate rumors about mining interests. Then because you needed help." He met her eyes. "Now it's because I care what happens to you." The simple honesty of his words touched June deeply. "I'm glad you found me in the rain," she said softly. Ross stepped closer, his hand gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "So am I." For a moment, June thought he might kiss her and was surprised by how much she wanted him to. But he stepped back, returning to his task with renewed focus. They set out at dawn the next morning, making no secret of their departure. As expected, 2 riders appeared on the ridge, following at a distance as they headed north. "They've taken the bait," Ross murmured as they reached the fork in the road. June nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was their chance to save her ranch, her home. They traveled north for several miles before finding the sheltered ravine they had identified on the map. Quickly, they changed direction, using the natural features of the land to conceal their movement south. By midday, they had successfully evaded their pursuers and were making good time toward Cheyenne. June felt a growing sense of hope as they rode side by side across the rolling Wyoming landscape. "If this works," she said, "if we secure the mineral rights before the foreclosure." "Then the bank can't take your land," Ross finished. "And even if they try, the mineral rights will remain yours. You could lease them to a mining company for a substantial income." June smiled, the first genuine smile Ross had seen from her. "Enough to save the ranch." "More than enough," Ross assured her. "You could rebuild, expand. The Rocking Sea could be one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory." They made camp that night in a protected hollow, the fire kept deliberately small to avoid detection. Under the vast starry sky, they talked for the first time since Ross had found June in the rain. She told him about meeting Thomas at a church social back in Missouri, how they had married young and come west with dreams of building something lasting. How the harsh realities of frontier life had tested but ultimately strengthened their bond. How losing him had nearly broken her. In turn, Ross shared his own journey, orphaned young, raised by an uncle who taught him ranching, then striking out on his own at 18. He spoke of the cattle drives, the years working on other men's ranches, learning and saving until he had enough experience to manage a property like Crawford's. "Have you never wanted your own place?" June asked, watching him across the fire. Ross prodded the embers thoughtfully. "Always, but land is expensive and good land even more so." He looked up at her. "What about you? If this works, when this works, what will you do with the Rocking Sea?" "Keep it running," June said without hesitation. "It was Thomas's dream, but it became mine too. I love that land, every rock and tree of it." Ross nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It gets in your blood." "Yes," June agreed softly, "it does." The silence that fell between them was comfortable, filled with newfound understanding. June found herself studying Ross's profile against the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. In the short time she had known him, he had become important to her in ways she hadn't thought possible after Thomas. The thought should have frightened her, or at least brought guilt. Instead, it felt right, as if Thomas himself would approve of this man who had come to her rescue and fought so hard for her land. As if sensing her thoughts, Ross looked up, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "We should get some rest," he said gently. "We have a long ride tomorrow." June nodded, settling into her bedroll. But sleep was slow to come, her mind filled with thoughts of coal seams and mineral rights and the man sleeping just a few feet away. They reached Cheyenne late the following day, dusty and tired from the hard ride. The territorial capital was larger and more imposing than Millstone Creek, with brick buildings and boardwalks lining the streets. They found modest lodgings, separate rooms, though Ross insisted on one adjoining hers for safety and agreed to visit the land office first thing in the morning. June fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the journey. She was woken in the early hours by a soft knock at the adjoining door. "June," Ross's voice came quietly. "Are you awake?" "Yes," she replied, sitting up and wrapping a shawl around her nightdress. "What's wrong?" The door opened slightly and Ross stood there, fully dressed. "I've been watching the street. 2 men arrived an hour ago asking questions at the hotel desk. I think they've found us." June's heart raced. "How? We were so careful." "Telegraph, most likely. Wells must have contacts here." Ross's expression was grim. "We need to get to the land office as soon as it opens, before they can interfere." Dawn found them waiting outside the territorial land office, first in line when the clerk arrived to open the doors. June clutched the leather portfolio containing her deed and ownership papers, her knuckles white with tension. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles much like Wells's, regarded them with mild interest as they explained their purpose. "Mineral rights filing, you say?" He repeated, pulling out various forms. "For the Vance property in Sweetwater County." "Yes," June confirmed. "I'm the legal owner, as these papers show." The clerk examined her documents with painful slowness. Ross stood beside her, his body tense as he periodically glanced toward the door. "Everything appears to be in order, Mrs. Vance," the clerk finally said. "Though I see here the property is currently subject to foreclosure proceedings." "The foreclosure isn't final," Ross interjected, "and mineral rights are separate from land ownership under territorial law." The clerk nodded. "Correct, Mr. Carson. Even if the bank forecloses, Mrs. Vance would retain any properly filed mineral rights." He stamped several documents. "There will be a filing fee of $20. Ross quickly produced the money and the clerk continued processing the paperwork. Just as he was about to apply the final stamp, the office door burst open. Herbert Wells strode in, accompanied by a well-dressed gentleman and the 2 men who had been watching June's ranch. "Stop that filing," Wells demanded, his face flushed with anger. The clerk looked up in surprise. "Sir, I'm in the middle of a legal transaction." "That woman has no right to file for mineral rights," Wells sputtered. "Her property is being foreclosed upon." "Which has no bearing on her mineral rights claim," the clerk replied calmly. "As I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Wells." The well-dressed man stepped forward. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," he suggested smoothly, reaching into his jacket. "I represent the Western Coal and Railroad Company. We have a substantial interest in that property." "I'm sure you do," Ross said coldly. "Which is why you've been trying to cheat Mrs. Vance out of her rightful claim." The clerk cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, please, this is a government office." He turned to June. "Mrs. Vance, your filing is complete and recorded. Congratulations on your mineral rights claim." June felt a surge of triumph as she accepted the stamped documents. They had done it. Her land, at least the valuable part of it, was secure. Wells's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "The foreclosure still stands. You'll have nowhere to live, nowhere to operate from." "About that," Ross said, producing another document from his pocket. "I've been authorized by Samuel Crawford to make an offer, a partnership between the Crawford and Vance properties, pooling resources to develop both." The railroad man's expression changed from anger to calculation. "Crawford's land, too. The coal seam extends that far." "It does," Ross confirmed. "And now you'll have to negotiate fairly with both property owners if you want access to it." Outside the land office, June could hardly contain her elation. "We did it," she exclaimed, clutching the precious papers. "Ross, I can't believe we actually did it." Ross's smile was wide and genuine. "Did you doubt we would?" "Every step of the way," she admitted with a laugh. "But you never did." His expression softened as he looked at her, standing in the morning sunlight with joy illuminating her features. "I never doubt a woman who can face down a storm, grief, and bank foreclosure with the courage you've shown." June's laughter faded, replaced by something deeper. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," Ross contradicted gently, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." They rowed back to Millstone Creek with lighter hearts, though still watchful for trouble. Wells and the railroad men had left Cheyenne ahead of them, no doubt to regroup and plan their next move. "What will happen now?" June asked as they made camp on the second night of their return journey. Ross poked at the fire thoughtfully. "Wells will still try to foreclose, but with the mineral rights secured, you have leverage. Crawford's offer of partnership is genuine. Together, the two properties can operate profitably while negotiating favorable terms with the railroad for coal extraction." "And you'll stay on as Crawford's manager?" June tried to keep her tone casual, though the answer suddenly seemed enormously important. Ross looked up at her, the firelight casting his features in warm gold. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there might be a reason for me to stay closer to the rocking sea than the Crawford place." His voice was quiet but clear in the night air. June's heart quickened. "What kind of reason?" Ross set aside the stick he'd been using to tend the fire and moved to sit beside her. "June, when I found you in the rain that day, I called you my wife as a cover story. But these past days, riding together, fighting together, it's become more than that for me." He took her hand gently. "I know it's soon. I know you're still healing from losing Thomas. But I've come to care for you in a way I didn't think possible." June looked down at their joined hands, emotions swirling within her. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly, "and it frightened me at first, like I was betraying Thomas's memory somehow. And now," she met his eyes, "now I think Thomas would want me to be happy, to have someone to share the ranch with, to build the future we planned." Her voice wavered slightly. "He was a practical man. He wouldn't want me to grieve forever." Ross reached up to touch her cheek gently. "I would never try to replace him in your heart, but I'd like the chance to build something new with you, something that honors what you had while creating something that's just ours." June leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, her decision was made. "I'd like that too." Ross's kiss was gentle but sure, a promise of things to come. June felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the nearby fire and everything to do with the man holding her. When they returned to the ranch, they found Samuel Crawford himself waiting for them. The older man greeted Ross warmly and June with respect, confirming his offer of partnership and adding details that made the arrangement even more favorable for June. "With the mineral rights you've secured and our combined acreage, we can negotiate from a position of strength," Crawford explained as they sat around June's kitchen table. "The railroad needs our coal and they'll pay handsomely for it." "And Wells?" June asked. Crawford's expression hardened. "Let's just say his superiors at the Territorial Bank were most interested to learn of his private dealings with the railroad. He'll be leaving his position, effective immediately." The new bank representative arrived the following day, a practical woman named Mrs. Hollister, who quickly worked out terms to refinance June's loan using the mineral rights as collateral. "With the royalties from the coal extraction, you'll have this paid off within 2 years," Mrs. Hollister assured her, "and substantial income beyond that." As June signed the new loan documents, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her home was saved, her future secure. And beside her stood Ross, his steady presence a reminder that she had found not just financial security but a second chance at happiness. The railroad men eventually returned, this time with fair contracts and respectful negotiations. Work began on the first coal extraction site, carefully placed to minimize disruption to the cattle operations on both properties. 3 months after the day Ross had found June collapsed beside the barn in the rain, they stood together in the same spot, only this time, under clear blue skies. The minister from Millstone Creek pronounced them husband and wife before a small gathering of friends and neighbors. "When I first called you my wife, it was to protect you," Ross said softly as they danced together that evening. "Now it's the greatest honor of my life that it's actually true." June smiled up at him, her heart full. "From the moment you lifted me out of the mud, I think part of me knew we'd end up here." The rocking sea flourished under their joint care, expanding its cattle operation while the coal extraction provided additional income. They built a larger home the following year, with wide verandas and enough bedrooms for the family they both hoped to have. And when their first child was born, a son they named Thomas in honor of June's first husband, they felt the circle of their life together was complete. Not replacing what had been lost, but building something new and beautiful from the foundation of the past. Standing on the porch of their home, watching Ross teach their son to ride his first pony, June thought of that rainy day that had brought them together. How strange that her darkest moment had led to such light. How fitting that, in the aftermath of a storm, she had found not just shelter but love.